300 is coming up soon, June 14th. We're still asking for you guys to send in your stuff. You got the better promo on that, Kyle.
Sure.
Maybe you can explain what we're doing for 300.
Well, we've got a lot of people that listen to the podcast. We'd love to hear why you continue to listen. So if there's a reason why you listen, what you appreciate about the podcast, maybe a certain question or point of your thinking has changed because of it, we'd just love to hear and celebrate that, read out your feedback on it. And anybody that sends it in will be entered for a chance to win a draw for some gift cards that day. So far, we've got one person that sent it in, so they're going to win. So you guys are more listeners than participants at this point. But we know you're out there, so send in your feedback.
Wow, we got like two extremes. Blake wants to know how the listeners are, and you're like shaming them. You're not a participant, you're just a listener.
I'm thankful they listen, but I'd love to have their feedback.
We need some questions. We're running thin here, so if you got questions you've been thinking about and pondering on, send them in. This is the moment.
Maybe, we are closing in on 300 episodes. Maybe we've answered every question.
We're getting close.
So maybe there are no questions left.
We have no AER, so obviously we've been doing well at answering questions lately. No one's thought we were crazy.
Now feel free to re-ask questions too, though.
That's true.
Because we've changed our mind on things as has been evidenced by questions that have come back up.
So who are you giving permission to re-ask questions?
Anybody.
Okay.
If you feel like,
Has your
we've
Bible
already talked
crush
about
changed?
That. What's that?
Has your Bible crush changed?
No. No, it hasn't.
Okay, I'm just asking. You said I could ask.
That's fair.
So
you have to submit it the proper way. You just can't ask questions like just off the cuff right here on the.
There are
show.
proper.
sorry, I will submit that one anonymously after the podcast is over.
Laura Van Dellen says the podcast helps her fall asleep, is why she appreciates it. Wow.
Thanks, Lori.
If I want to say you're welcome to that or not, but thanks, Lori.
We just like to be helpful wherever we can.
Yeah.
Right? That's. All right, well, let's get to some questions because
Did we talk about the episode 300? Well, I felt like we diverted off of that.
Okay.
I feel like
would you like?
Yeah,
to
I
do
feel
a
like
promo?
that.
I asked Kyle to do
No,
it,
I just
but-
felt like we kind of quickly shifted off of that. That we do desperately need people to give us some stuff for that. So,
Yeah.
just I didn't know if we really like hammered it like we were saying we wanted to hammer it. You just started shaming people instead.
All right, and
So-
the date is June 14th. June 14th is episode 300.
Yeah.
It is going to be awesome. That's all we want me to say. It's going to be so good. Make sure you tune in for episode 300, but also send us your feedback and tell us what you think about the show. Tell us one thing that you'd mentioned before. You didn't say it today, but just if any of the questions have helped mold or prompted you to maybe change your thinking or even theology or just like where you're on this journey with Jesus, like what is it saying to you? So we'd love to hear those stories.
Or how the podcast has helped you.
Yeah. I think we have talked, not always on the podcast, but even our thinking has changed over the years. I guess you just said that, you can re-ask questions. And the podcast helps sometimes. Sometimes you guys say some good stuff that is really profound. And I'm like, yeah.
Sometimes.
I can think about that for a bit. But, yeah. So there you go. Is that a better promo for 300?
It's fantastic.
All right. Then we are going to get going with some questions here.
Awesome.
Question number 1 today. If someone currently going to the church and is gay, if someone is currently going to the church and is gay, would they be allowed to be on the board?
So this is an interesting question for a multitude of reasons as I've been thinking about this one. And I guess when I think about this question, I think about maybe some people don't understand how our church governance works.
Right.
So I thought we should have maybe a discussion on that, which maybe is not at all what this person's wanting to ask. But so first of all, I would say, I don't know. When you say is gay, does that mean in a gay relationship or identifies as gay but is abstaining, or identifies as gay but is in a heterosexual relationship / marriage? Like there's lots of context within.
Lots of expressions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Within that term. And I know in the church sometimes we're hesitant to just use the word gay broadly. Mm-hmm. And so we'll say same-sex attracted or some other things. But outside of the church, everybody just uses the term gay.
Totally.
So having done some reading on homosexuality and the church and how the church should respond and different positions on homosexuality and positions the church should take regarding homosexuality, I've come to the place where it's like, no, let's just say gay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, I'm first of all operating from the assumption that this person's asking the question under that broad umbrella.
Okay.
Because that's how, and that's just me, that's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah.
But I want to just be clear on that, because for some people, they may think gay and they may think that means living a gay lifestyle. But there are people who say, I'm gay, but I'm living a single lifestyle, I'm abstaining. And there are some people who are in a heterosexual relationship but still identify as gay. And I know some of these people. So
Yeah. Some of the other terms too, just to help add terms to the side A would be somebody who's gay and in a gay relationship. Side B is somebody who's abstaining. Are there's kind of two terms there, or mixed orientation marriage is for somebody who's married.
you're saying
to somebody.
side A and side B are
Yeah,
terms?
that's the terminology within kind of Christian conversation around expressions of of somebody who's gay and how they interact with the world around them to follow along with what their convictions are towards Scripture. So side A would be more simply termed affirming. Side B would be unaffirming, but I'm gay, I'm out, but I'm not in a relationship with somebody because I'm choosing to abstain. Side B.
So would side B also then be people who are identify as gay but are in a heterosexual?
So that'd be somebody in a mixed orientation marriage.
So there's not a side C?
No.
Okay. Well, there could be more than two sides.
Totally.
So, all right. So just so
There
we
you go.
start there.
Just adding some terminology.
Would they be allowed to be? So the way that if somebody is going to the church, it's not people who go to the church who can be board members. To become a board member, you have to be a member of the church. So you have to go through a membership process, and you have to become a member of the church. And part of becoming a member of the church is acknowledging that you are a follower of Christ. So somebody can be coming to the church and not even be a Christian. And we're more than happy to have people who aren't yet followers of Jesus coming to church. That's wonderful. We love to have those people in the church. So there is a whole lot of that. And then if somebody is a Christian, has become a member, then they can be nominated. And it's somebody in the church who nominates them, other members of the church. Again, not people who are going to the church, but this is, we don't talk a lot about membership in our church except for before any business meetings that we have, because the only thing that really membership does is give you the opportunity to participate in the business of the church.
Yep.
At our church, if you're not a member, you can come and serve, you can come and participate in anything, you can do all sorts of things without being a member.
Yep.
But if you want to be involved in the business of the church, which would be voting on any matters at a business meeting, which would be nominating people for a board member, which would be being nominated for a board member, and there may be a couple other things I can't think of right now, but those would be the main ones. You need to be a member.
Yep.
So there is that element there. And then once and maybe people just don't know what happens once they nominate somebody, but once we get the nominations as the board, we go through and we vet those, and we go, okay, are these people that we feel like are in a healthy enough place in a relationship with God? And not that we're judging, but there has to be some discernment.
An examination.
And, examination. And then if the board's like, yeah, that's good. And most of the names, we try to let the names go through as much as possible. But there are times where it's like, well, there's just stuff going on. And as a pastor, sometimes I know, even if sometimes I know that somebody is thinking that they're going to be moving in 3 months. Right. Because sometimes as a pastor, you find stuff out. I'll be like, well, let's not put that name forward.
Yep.
And the board trusts me. I don't have to give reasons. They just understand that I know sometimes things that are happening, and that'll say, let's not have that name. For a variety of reasons, that can happen and has happened. But we try to have as many names as possible that we can put forward, because the board is supposed to be, according to our church governance, selected by the church. And so we want to give as much as possible the opportunity for the church to select those people. And then once those names are vetted, they go to... we contact all the people who've been nominated, and we ask them if they will let their names stand. Yep. And some people say yes, and some people say no. And then that's how we come up with a slate of names that are presented at the AGM that then ultimately are voted on by the congregation. Yep. So, it's not nearly as easy, and I'd love to be able to just give us an answer, but it's not. There's a lot of variables in that question.
So, good. I was going to say, so let's just then play the hypothetical gay. Let's say the person's a part of the church, they're gay. I guess that you'd even have to make in the scenario where they're at in relationships. But they went through all those channels. They'd been here for long enough. They got membership. They were nominated by somebody else. And does that stand then for the congregation? And then, to be honest, as a whole part of where our congregation is at as a whole, because they also then have to vote
Yes.
towards that person, right? So it's
Well,
not
that's what I'm
just
saying. Ultimately, at the
yeah.
end of the day, it's the congregation that votes
Yeah.
to determine who the board members are.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so I was going to say the same thing. So whatever umbrella we're using for the gay here in this question, if that's well known, whatever relationship they're choosing to have in that or whatever else would be known and found out all through that process. And yeah, it wouldn't be like a secretive thing, and it wouldn't be something where us three or you, Doug, would just put someone on the board and no one knows what's going on. None of that happens. This is a pretty open process in the fact that people at least know who these people are. They should if they're voting, right?
Okay, but to remove the idea of someone being gay, let's just take a step back from that specific. There have been people who've gotten on the board who have been struggling with something that people don't know and other board members don't know. So as much as
Yes,
much as
but
people know,
I don't think that's the way this question is being
right? But I'm
asked.
just responding to
Yeah.
what you said.
Right.
You know, because you said that everybody knows, but we don't always know.
Yeah.
So, but we do our best to know.
True, but I just think that would be a different way of asking the question, right? Like if someone is, I don't know, struggling with alcoholism, right? And secretly doing that, and then they got on the board because everyone loves them and they're a good person and all the rest, and then we found that out, then we would deal with that however that would play out, right? The same thing would be if someone was gay. But the way the question seems to be asked is it seems to be an open thing. So then it's a different way of thinking, right? We wouldn't be surprised by it. I don't think the question's asking, all of a sudden they're on the board and they're like, what happened, right? So
Well, I think the comparison to alcohol, and I know what you're saying. Don't hear me there. But I think oftentimes those comparisons get thrown around, and I don't think there'd be any room in much of our discussion for somebody who's constantly giving in to alcoholism, that we would be putting them in any place of serving in a church, really, if that was out, versus our accommodating stance we talked about right on this podcast a number of years ago. There's a discernment there that isn't.
Yeah,
right.
And I do apologize if I didn't mean to compare those
Yeah, no, I
two.
know
I
you
was just
didn't.
talking about something that might be unknown to people.
Yeah, no, I don't wanted to clarify, just in case anybody heard anything different. But yeah, we had that discussion on this podcast a couple of years ago, the accommodating stance of we're going to putting anybody in any place of servant leadership in this church period, we're going to have process and relationship with them and examine our lives, period, gay, straight, or other, to look at the fruit of their life, to also come through those different areas to be able to serve in whatever part of the church. That I would assume that would be a similar conversation towards the board.
Yes, and that's why I don't know. It's never happened.
Yep.
So we're answering theoretically, but I guess for me, it would be something there would be. Doug doesn't make these decisions.
Yep.
The board makes these decisions as far as putting names forward, and then the congregation makes the decision as far as who gets voted in. So, and I know different church structures function different ways.
Yep.
So there's just a lot of this, and I feel like this answers somewhat. I feel like someone could say it's a cop-out, but it is the reality of our church governance and the way our church functions is that it is not me or any pastor who's putting people on the board. Now, there are church structures, even in our denomination, that are pastor's council, not a board, a pastor's council, where the pastor appoints
Handpicks,
people
yep.
and picks somebody, and then those two people handpick a third, and it goes in that way. And the reality is you could have a discussion and say, well, the pastor's just going to end up with a bunch of people that are all the people that like him that are just going to give him what he wants.
Yeah.
Maybe. The reality is, and I really wish that people would get this, because I've had so many conversations over the year with people who go, well, that system doesn't work because of this possible abuse. The problem with every structure, the problem with every system that has ever existed is the people in the system.
Yep.
If the people are trying to honor Christ, the system will work. And God will move in any system. Mm-hmm. You saw this, I think, and now we're really way off topic, but that's okay. You saw this, so let's just, and I'm not even talking about homosexuality, I'm talking about church structure at this point. you had the Pentecostal movement that started 120 years ago, a little more than 120 years ago that started. And when the Pentecostal movement started, it started at Azusa Street in Los Angeles, and there was a desire for the movers of that original, the leaders of that original movement to affiliate with some denomination. And for various reasons, they were rejected by all of them. And people were going to Azusa Street and then going back to their hometown and planting churches.
Yep.
And wanting to connect. And there was a desire to kind of put some structure in place.
Yep.
And the result of all of that was that nobody would have them, so they created their own structure. And so the Pentecostal Assemblies became this structure that is its own thing. And then out of that came this arrogance.
Yep.
And that sounds terrible to say about our forefathers in the Pentecostal movement, but there did come this arrogance that we're the Pentecostals, we're the ones who have the Spirit of God. Our church structure is right because we're blessed by God. But then you had the 60s, you had this charismatic movement that went through Anglican, United, Lutheran, Catholic, Presbyterian, all these mainline churches that had signs and wonders and the miraculous and everything that a lot of Pentecostals struggled with, because it was like, how can they have the Spirit of God move in them because they're corrupt?
Yep.
And we always, whatever system we like, we assume is the right system. And we miss the fact that the problem's never with the system. The problem is always with the people in the system. And the people can corrupt any system.
Yep.
So you could have a pastor's council where the pastor goes and approaches godly people who will argue and who will disagree. Or you can have a pastor's council where the pastor just cherry picks all the people he likes. Yep. You can have a board where it functions really well, and our board has always been amazing and been wonderful. You can have a board full of angry people who just try to keep the pastor under their thumb and keep everybody who runs every ministry under their thumb, because I'm the boss here, right? And when you get into that, you can have the board members who are starting to try to exert influence even over different ministries of the church.
Yep.
I'm a board member, so you have to do what I say. The problem was never the church structure.
Yep.
The problem has always been humanity. So,
And I think saying that and kind of coming back to the question a little bit, something that I want to say is obviously, I don't know, we have rules, we have structures for reason. But when it comes to like pastoral care, I know that the three of us anyways, or our current staff, take the position that we want to care for individuals. And we know that individuals are different every time, right? And so when we're dealing with any issue that would be an issue within a Christian church, and we're dealing with an individual, we're trying to, as best we can, meet them on their individual basis, and find out the story, find out what's going on, and deal with that. So I get it, because I grew up in church and I know how it goes, but sometimes I look at this question and it's like, well, is your church going to put gay people on the board? And it's like black and white when we want the rules, and it's like, I don't know. In my time pastoring, it's never been black and white. Like, there is always nuances to each and every person's story and situation. And we as a church here, I love it, because I think we're really trying to do that. We're trying to deal with the individuals as best we can as we get the opportunity to. Some people we don't, obviously. We can only help people who try and or want the help. But yeah, it's not always as easy as just saying, well, here's the line, right?
Yep.
There's a lot that goes into that.
Yep.
And I think the beauty of even the way we bring our board members on and the structure that you kind of said, I hope that those people are being vetted through that process of they've been met as individuals. We've heard their stories in their heart. Yep. As open as they are with us, I mean, we can't deal with stuff they're not going to tell us, but the things they are telling us, then we are walking with them appropriately, trying to love God and love people. That is the goal here, right? So I just think the question is too black and white as it's written, right? And I understand it. I know why you're asking the question. That's totally fine. But I just want to say there's always more to that than just rules. And unless you want, I guess there's churches out there that just have rules. If you want to go to that one, then go to that one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
yep.
Cool.
So, I can't help it. Whenever you talk about structures, I can't help but think about the book of Revelation and the beast, right? and how we create a system and then we serve that system.
Yep.
And it's easy to look out in the world and go, look at that beast,
Yep.
look at that empire, right? To borrow
Just-
terms from the Bema podcast, the way of empire, the way of shalom,
Yep.
the revelation, the way of the lamb or the way of the beast. Whatever term you want to use,
Yep.
we are all, it's so easy for us all to be guilty of that, that we create a system and then we go, this is now the system.
Yep.
This is the structure. You serve the structure.
Totally.
Instead of the structure serving the people.
Christianity is just as guilty as the rest of the world.
What's the church is full of people,
Yep, exactly.
right?
Well, and I think-
and people are people.
I think our greatest example of how we're supposed to live is Jesus. And yeah, he deals with individuals differently. Like it doesn't seem like there's much of a structure in how he meets one person and goes to another luncheon and then meets the woman at the well, and just like he seems to meet people and try to meet where they're at, right?
Yep.
So all right, moving on. Question number 2 today. What's the difference between the terms Hebrew, Israelite, Jew, and Semite? And when referring to the people group of the Old Testament, when should we use each of them, and or how do they differ from one another?
I would say largely they're used interchangeably. I don't think anyone will bat much of an eye at you if you do, but there are slight differences I'm aware of.
Correct.
So, and feel free to jump in when I'm wrong, because I'm sure I will be at some point.
We've never hesitated before.
Hebrew, I think, is primarily used in the kind of nomadic state of the Hebrew people when they're unidentified, they don't have their own land. So this is leading into getting to Egypt. This is after Egypt and until they establish the kingdom. This is referring mostly to their more nomadic lifestyle as a hodgepodge of people, and even kind of there's a record even within when they're leaving. Exodus, Egypt in Exodus, there's other people that come along with them, right? So it's this mishmash of people. Israelite then would be referring to, in biblical time, and then now there's a whole modern context of people who are
Yes.
from Israel. So that's a whole separate can of worms than the biblical one, which would be referring to the united land of Israel.
Yep.
Jew then comes out from the land of Judah when they have split to Israel and to Judah. And so that's, for whatever reason, I haven't looked at the history of that one, but I believe that's where that one roots from, referring to the people of Judah as Jews. And Semite is not only to the people of, not only to the worshipers of Yahweh, but Semite is anyone speaking a Semitic language, which would have referred to other Syrians, Assyrians, Mesopotamians as well. And so that's more of a linguistic categorization than a religious one. I think that's what I got so far.
I would just add that, and I'm thinking by the time of Jesus, that's kind of where I'm thinking, that you could have been a Jew but not an Israelite.
Correct.
Right? Jew at that point represented
Religious
people, people who were followers of Yahweh who
Yep.
had committed to become circumcised and follow the law,
Yep.
follow the Torah.
Yep.
I want to use Torah, not law, because you could follow the heart of the Torah.
Yep.
But people who were that. So you did have, by Jesus' day, people who had decided to become Jewish who were not Israeli.
Yeah.
Right? And that goes back to Abraham, where God says to Abraham, through you I'm going to bless all nations. Like the original desire that God had was that Israel would be a blessing to the nations and draw people to him through Israel, that other people would become, for lack of a better term, Jews, followers of Yahweh. So by the time of Jesus' day, Jew and Israelite were not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah. You can convert to Judaism. You cannot convert to Israelite.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And, well, I don't know you convert to Israel, but you could go move to Israel and
Sure.
then become a
citizen over time.
can-
right.
become a
Like
citizen, yeah.
even in biblical times, you could, but you wouldn't unless you were Jewish, and you did have people who converted to Judaism,
Yep.
who decided they were going to become followers of Yahweh, who were not Israeli.
Yeah.
Well said.
The blending of all these terms also shows a very different cultural heritage than we think of in modern times. Like for your religion and your geographic heritage to all be one, and racial things to all stem together, is showing how interconnected life was in the time, versus now we would parse all those out as individual different pieces. Okay, so you're white? What religion do you follow? Where are you from? Like, where's your heritage? And we parse all those out versus these terms end up oftentimes being, as I said, used interchangeably, largely simply to refer to these people were all in on all these things, and it was an encompass life.
Yeah, I think I, anyways, could read those terms in this question today and just think of ethnic or ethnicity, right? And yet the way we're using them, the way we're explaining them, it's not necessarily that at all, right? Like there's lots that goes into it other than just being born in Israel, right? So
I have to say that the term Hebrew, I guess it's the book Hebrews, was really ruined for me.
With Chris Green?
No. When I remember stopping at a church one time, going to a church one time, and they had a coffee bar, and the coffee bar was called Hebrews. And it's just, ever since then, it's been like, I struggle with that, because that's where I now see two words all the time. And it's like this virus in my head that I cannot get rid of.
that's clever, though, right? Like,
No, it's sad.
why?
I'm not
If God
making it.
called Abraham and got his people together, like he was brewing, he was like making a thing. I'm like,
But-
I can see the connection there.
I'm not saying it's sad. I'm just saying that every time I hear the word Hebrews, there's a part of me that thinks about coffee, and I don't even drink coffee. It's just like,
Well, yeah. For
anyway,
you, Doug,
I remember seeing it like that was really clever, and it was more clever than I gave it credit for, because years later it's still like whenever I see that word, I think of coffee now.
That's
I'm
hilarious.
just being honest. God's working on my heart too.
I thought you were going to kind of talk about Chris Green's use of the term Hebrew, which I really appreciated when we were doing that Hebrews course. I'm sure we'll get back to it one day, where he was identifying, and this is just me extrapolating in my own head how he was separating them, but that nomadic people who were so desperate and beginning this relationship with God and depending on him before they get into, as we've just been talking about, all the systems of like, all right, we got our land, here's the temple structure, here's the religious structure, Pharisees and Sadducees and all those jumping up. Like the Hebrew people is that grassroots movement, and I feel like he kind of used those terms in referring to the Hebrews versus the Jews, not just as he was using that course, not to take the time to give anything else. But I really appreciate the use of that term of that grassroots movement of the people of Yahweh.
Before it gets a structure that Doug was talking about in the last question.
Yep, totally.
Wrecked everything.
Just like Christianity was ruined by Constantine.
Yeah.
Just like Hebrews was ruined by a coffee bar.
We're just dropping a thing, fishing for more questions
Yes,
here.
please send in your questions. If you hear anything you don't understand, please ask. We would love to explain it. Moving on to the next question then. I've been thinking about the land the church has access to. Would it be possible to make a shelter for those struggling on the property and have social workers and a community pastor tied in? Obviously, many other things would need to fall into place, but would this be an avenue to serve an underserved community?
Absolutely. That would be wonderful. It'd be beautiful. I would love to have something like that happen. I've thought many thoughts about our property and what we could do on our property. And yes, absolutely. The only challenge we have is we have no money.
Yes.
So that is what has hindered all of the dreams that I've had. I've often thought, and this is, if we ever did anything on our property, what I would like is to build a new building that would not look like a traditional church in that it's just church. Our building, and maybe a lot of people don't know this, gets used every day by different groups, and they make the most of using a building that was designed as a church, using it for what they use it for. And they work within the architectural structure to make it work. And we are really, really happy to let our building be used as much as it is used. It's used almost every day of the week. I've always thought it would be really cool if we could build something new, to build something that would be more of like a community center that would feel like that and that people would know that, and then to name it something like the name that I had in my head was like the West Airdrie Community Center, but then underneath say Home of Living Springs Christian Fellowship, which I think would just be a really cool way of reminding people constantly the church is the people, the church is not the building, because we lose that.
Yeah, totally.
I had a cool moment a couple of weeks ago just thinking about what you just said about how often our building gets used and the community center feel of it. I was talking to someone who their church that they operate out of in Airdrie currently doesn't have a building.
Right.
And they said they're getting really tired of being in a gymnasium where they have to take down and set up chairs every week.
Yeah.
And I just had a thought. I didn't say it out loud, but I was like, we take down and set up our chairs every week and we have a building, right? Like our building gets used so much. Like it is very rare that we don't have chairs taken down and set up at some point during the week.
Yeah.
Now I understand maybe our sound system
Yes.
and that stays the same, like our stage setup, so we don't have to carry tech stuff around.
Yeah.
But chairs, get pulled in and out of that sanctuary all the time. So
Yes. And I think if we had a new building, I don't know that would change because I would have a hard time with having that many square feet
Dedicated
dedicated to something that gets used a few hours a week.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
And yes, it can be a pain to put the chairs up every week, and we've all done that.
Yeah.
Like hundreds of times.
Yep.
That's okay. I don't personally don't mind doing it. I go, this is one way that I serve the church and that I serve the city is by coming in and being able to just kind of help set the chairs back up after somebody's using it for some good that they're doing. So I don't know that would change, but you're right. It is funny. Now I think that it would be another thing to have to set up a sound system and all that sort of stuff.
And I'm not downplaying. I'm just
Yeah.
it just struck me how often we take down and set up chairs.
Totally.
So, yeah, and
So-
I love that. I love that our building gets used.
I do. I would love to do something really cool with our land. There's been a lot of dreams that we've had over the years and a lot of thoughts that we've had over the years. And I hope someday that something is done. But thus far, it hasn't been able to work. We haven't been able to get anywhere. And but certainly that would be a very cool thing.
I didn't foresee how connected all these questions would be back to structures. That's also something that the way we're structured, the church would have voice into starting and continuing and navigating through that process the whole way through as a board and congregation would be voting on different stages of development and process.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So
it would
just
not be
say-
the Doug dream. It
Yeah.
would be something that collectively the church buys into.
Yeah. And so I appreciate this person asking, but if you want to send an email with a name on it, that can be a part of future conversations as well with some of these ideas and thoughts that you may have instead of just the anonymous question.
And if you have $10 million,
And if you got $10 million,
Send it in.
that would help as well.
but just ways, the limitations money for sure. We'd love this building to be used, and so even I know some of the conversations in the past have been how can we leverage some of the land to be able to accomplish those dreams and not have to have the cost because we'll have some kind of income to cover that and be a blessing with what we can get. So. Yeah.
I would encourage if you are listening to this podcast, if you would be praying about that. I do think this is something that we need God to make the way in this situation.
Yeah.
But if you would be so kind as to pray for our building, our land, the leadership to have wisdom to know what to do with the building and the land, for partners, if that's what it is, or for finances, if that's what it is, to help out, however you want to pray. If you want to pray, that'd be great.
I have thought much since I've come on staff here, and I've known you for a long time, Doug, so I've known a little bit that you've shared with me over the years about dreams and our hopes for the land. I just think I want to steward it well. And I think we're doing the best we can right now, and I want to continue that. I think God has blessed us with this little chunk on the corner of Airdrie. He's got a plan, and it'd be nice if he'd let us know earlier, but, in his time, he's right. So I just keep thinking, okay, let's just keep being good stewards daily and see what he gives us, right? So, or where he leads us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, next question then. Can you guys share your opinions on some of the movements to cancel drag and drag culture? I know this is more prevalent conversation in the States, but I do see the movement somewhat trickling into Canada and Canadian law. Is it really anti-Christian to have these things like drag brunches or reading circles? Why is it that Christianity has been so embedded in what current lawmakers are passing?
I feel like there's a lot of questions there.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe we should break it down into...
I might start from
Pieces?
the end.
You want to start at the end? Why
Yeah,
is
I
it
think
that
so.
Christianity has been so embedded into what current lawmakers are
Because
passing?
I think that goes to a much wider thing before we specify down to the rest of the question.
Okay.
That I can't cite all the people that I'm even thinking of here, but I'm not as smart as I may sound as I start talking about some of this stuff. But they're looking culturally at Christianity, and as Christianity culturally and is losing numbers as we're moving into this post-Christian world. Back to humans and structures, we clamor at what we once have had, and so as Christians have been a majority of culture, Western culture, for a long time, and that is beginning to shift. Some of the ways that people will react is to become overly aggressive and defensive in certain situations. I'm not saying there's necessarily any individuals who are even thinking and being manipulative or anything like that, but it becomes this thing of to draw an apples to oranges comparison when you hear conversations around immigration. Well, if all these people keep coming in, then we're going to lose our jobs. So we got to keep, and so in a similar fashion, if all these other people that are not Christians start taking more influence, we're going to lose our ability to be Christian. And there's, I think, a very natural reaction that is happening. And so as Christianity as a part of our Western culture becomes less prevalent, that is an overreaction to try to embed and solidify our heritage. And then a lot of language, both American and Christianity, becomes, well, we're a Christian nation, reading certain interpretations into founding documents on both sides, which I don't see to be necessarily accurate, but then trying to lock down so we lose. And I really feel as though it is largely a fear-based reaction to put into law one group of people's thing, and that would apply to any other demographic, to try to lock into law for a whole liberal society. And I don't mean liberal politically, I mean liberal as in the founding kind of principles on allowing people to be liberated. The idea that we try to limit to one group's distinction in our laws is counter to what both these countries were founded on. So I think it's a fear reaction.
I think that we are living at the end of Christendom, and I can't remember if it's the Benedict option or one of the other books that address that. And I loved how they expressed it. Mm-hmm. Christendom, not the church.
Yep.
Christendom. In 300 AD, when Constantine made the church the state religion of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
The church, from that moment on, in the Western world, had all of a sudden tremendous amount of influence, and has for 1,700 years. Mm-hmm. So for all of us, no matter how old we are, we were all born in the era of Christendom, unless maybe somebody's 10 who's listening to this podcast. Because who knows when the date actually is. The reality is it's so hard for us to be able to grasp the seismic shift that's happening in our world today with the end of Christendom. Because if all of us sitting here on this podcast, we're all old enough that we were born into it. Yeah. And to know that era either has ended or is ending, and that it is reaching the point. Well, it has already reached a point where the church's grasp of the church's control over things and influence over things is gone. And I think that the natural response to that is to try to cling to the thing that you're losing. Yeah. That's human nature. I don't think we can get away from that without a lot of prayer. Mm-hmm. When somebody we love is dealing with an illness and we can see that they're dying, we want to cling to them. We don't want to let them go. Mm-hmm. In some places it's totally valid, in some places it's totally good, and in some places it really shouldn't be. I think it's okay for us to say, man, things have changed, and they're not what I've known my whole life. They're not what have been for 1,700 years. But I think it's also okay for us to come to the place where we say, I'm going to grieve this, but I'm still going to trust that God is God, and God is bigger than this. And I do see Christians in culture who are very much trying to influence law and influence lawmakers and do things to establish to maintain Christendom, the influence of the church over the state. Even where there would be a separation of church and state, we want to have them separated, but we want to be able to influence, and we still want to be the majority, and we still want to have not anything happen that we wouldn't like.
Yep.
And I think we have to come to the point where we give ourselves permission to say, this is scary and it is new, but the Bible over and over and over tells me not to be afraid. And if I truly believe what Jesus says and what the Bible says, the gates of hell cannot overcome the church. And when I see this fear-based reaction, I'm like, okay, we need to take a step back. I don't want to pretend like I don't get afraid. We all get afraid. Fear is a part of all of our lives. And when the Bible tells us not to fear, it's not saying, I don't believe, it's saying don't feel that emotion. What it's saying is don't let that emotion be what is driving you.
Yep.
But I see so many Christians who understand the Bible says don't fear, so they don't acknowledge their fear. And because they don't acknowledge their fear, then they just act like all is well, and that they're operating from a noble or from an altruistic motive instead of recognizing and being honest about the fact that they're actually operating from fear. But what we don't acknowledge will control us because we refuse to acknowledge it. So it'll just control us from the dark. And so I see a lot in the church where the church is trying to influence lawmakers and laws, and it seems to me that it's coming from this grasp to maintain Christendom.
Yep.
And I look at it and I'm like, the one thing from the Benedict option, like the war is over and we lost. Yeah. And I don't necessarily even think that's a bad thing.
No, I don't either.
It doesn't mean it's not an easy thing, or it doesn't mean it is an easy thing, but I don't think it's a bad thing. We have been, the world has changed. And sometimes we actually get what we asked for. Like, and I think about North America, and I think about how, as a culture, we said, let's be open, let's be free. Like, let's offer freedom. Yeah. Then people do things in that freedom that we don't like, and then we're like, you can't do that. But wait, we said that we wanted to be founded on freedom. Well, freedom just to do the things that they would do that are like me. But then that's not freedom.
Yep.
And the idea of freedom, like the idea of love, is something that we really like in theory, but that we're not very good at practicing.
Yep.
What do you guys think then? I'm deviating from the question. I'm asking a question now, and I said you're not allowed to ask questions on the podcast, but I'm asking one. What's the new thing then, right? Like if it used to be in some way some sort of political structure where I could go and lobby my government and get my Christian agenda to pass and go forward, if that's not what we're to do anymore, what are we supposed to do? How can we...
You mean the church?
Yeah, or Christians.
We're supposed to be salt and light. Okay. We should be living the life of following Jesus. Brian Zond in When Everything's on Fire, I just recently reread that book, and there was one line, and I've read that book 3 times now, and there's one line, and I never caught it. It never hit me the way it hit me. He said, holiness has less to do with being good and more to do with being other. Holiness is more about being different, a peculiar people, a weird people, a strange people.
Yeah, I remember that.
We are supposed to be people who live this different life that shows the wisdom of God, like Paul says in Ephesians, right? That the church is the tool that's supposed to be used to confound and to shame, principalities and powers, and show the world, like, dude, like, you guys are all doing it wrong, because we're supposed to be this people of peace, this people of love, this people of joy, this people of self-sacrifice, that genuinely live these things, genuinely demonstrate a way of life, the Jesus way, that is counter-cultural to the way the rest of the world operates. But we want to fit in with the world, and we want our faith to fit in with the world. But our faith is a faith of giving up my life to find it. Yeah. And how do we say I'm giving up my life to find it when I just am amassing everything and collecting everything and hoarding everything the same way that my neighbor does. Right?
If I could, I think one of the things
No, you cannot.
one of the things I think of is we are clamoring for control instead of thinking of people of influence, which is, I think, a big, like, instead of appealing to the powers of, we need to legislate this. And I think we also forget the environment we're living in. I've read some really thoughtful people who are not Christians, not even some atheists, who have written some really interesting pieces on their reasons why we should control some levels of abortion. To pick that one caveat, one issue. And when we go to these public forums, we can't assume a level of, well, we should legislate X because my Bible says so. That I think if God has invited us into the fullest way of life as we claim, the things that we live out and try to live out according to his word, I think should be influential and then can find universal language beyond the assumption of the biblical context and its authority. That if we're living this full life, it should appeal, as you've said, Doug, it should be an influence that we bring. So instead of going, hey, I've got something good that I've inherited from Christianity and from Jesus and from all the things there. Now I need to go to man's uses and legislate it with the power and the tools that they use, right? And I think if we were to change, I think of hospitals and universities and women's rights and the abolition of slavery, things that were, yes, in part done through legislation, totally get that. But a lot of them started as grassroots movements and were brought about by influence more than legislation first. That I think if we would appeal and understand and speak the language of our neighbors, the fullness of Christianity has something beautiful to offer. And instead we're clamoring for legislation around this, that, and the other thing.
I think even, like, speaking then more directly to the question, like, about the drag stuff, and I don't know everything that's going on in the States. I'm not as current and up-to-date or current events as other people are.
Sure.
But I think of just my own kids. I was just thinking this. I've said on this podcast before, they're upper teenagers. They're graduating school this year. I'm kind of on the adult end of things now.
You're almost an adult? Good job.
I'm just about getting there. We had this discussion with our kids just this last week because it's funny, as much as I agree with what you guys say, and I'm like, yes, we should. I do want to control my children and not let them do anything that would hurt them, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so we were having this discussion about these friends that a couple of my kids are hanging out with. And their response back to me was like, Dad, you always tell us to be out there and being a light to the world. And I'm like, yeah, but not those people, right? Like, but I think of this drag thing. Like, we had things that went through our school. Our school was, my kids went to the Francophone school, and they tried to be really open with current events and things that were happening in the world. One of the things they did one time, quite a few years ago, was brought in some native dancers and our indigenous dancers, and they were going to do their kind of powwow stuff or however they explained it, and they were gonna I think there was some blessing they were doing with, you know, smoking ashes or something like that, right? And I know that we have some other Christian friends that went to the school, and they were like, no way, they're writing letters to school trying to legislate it. We have native kids or indigenous kids, so we're like, okay, let's sit down and talk about this, and let's prepare your kids to be in that room, to be with them, and to discern for yourselves what is going on. And I understand age and all the rest, and we are the parents, and we should help our kids. But, yeah, I just feel like there's a different way of doing it, and I think that peculiar way is interesting, right? Like, that is probably the way that we should be acting as Christians, but it really takes a moment and pause in me as a parent on that specific one, or even with a drag thing, if that was something that I was trying to help my kids or grandkids deal with, would be how do I do that, right? How do I do it without just jumping and trying to get someone to make a law because I feel uncomfortable or fearful? And how do I fight my own fear in that and going, hang on, I'm okay. Like, we got Jesus. We're all right on this side, right?
Yeah.
How do we prepare our children then to live like that? It just reminded me of something else. My mom was in the hospital a year ago, and she was saying, this place is evil. Like, there's lots of stuff going on here. And she said she was fearful. And I said, what are you fearful of? I said, you got Jesus. I said, it's probably the reason everything's going weird around you is because everything around you is going, whoa, Jesus is here. Right. And it really changed her perspective.
But that's holiness. That's that otherness, right? You look in the Gospels, Jesus always, they would always try to trap him. If you say A, you're trapped. If you say B, you're trapped. There's no other answer. And Jesus always gave C. Yeah. And they could never anticipate. That's the otherness that holiness is actually supposed to be. But we we are afraid and we want to control. But I look at and I think if we could just take a step back and think on a more philosophical level, the only way to win someone over is love.
Yes.
Nobody's been legislated into loving a new opposite idea.
Yes, you can get obedience,
Yep.
but you haven't won your enemy over.
Correct.
You have not reached a point where you are beating your spears into plow hooks.
Plowshares.
Plowshares. Yeah. The word just all of a sudden was gone. Like when you look at the Old Testament prophecies about what Jesus was going to do, right? The increase of his government and of his peace will have no end. You look at those things. The only way that happens is changed hearts.
Yep.
And you don't change a heart with a law. You simply, best case scenario, you've got obedience.
Yep.
And worst case scenario, you've got a lawbreaker.
Yep.
And now you've got to punish that person, which only builds up more resentment.
Yep.
And this is where I'm like, so I'm thinking as we're sitting talking here about The Jesus Way, the book by Eugene Peterson that I read a month ago. And I wish I still had the book. I borrowed it from a friend. The end of the book, where he starts off and he talks about all these Old Testament figures who kind of foreshadowed Jesus being the way. But then the end of the book was the best part for me, where he talks about Herod, he talks about Caiaphas, he talks about Josephus, then he talks about groups like the Pharisees, the Zealots, and one other group, the people who were at Qumran, the Essenes. How they were going the opposite of the Jesus way.
Yep.
And he's like, here's the thing. This is the last chapter, the last paragraph of the book, which just, he's like, in Jesus' day, the Jesus way was not that popular. He said, but here's the thing. It's still not popular.
Yep.
And a lot of people still choose the way of Herod, the way of Caiaphas, the way of Josephus, the way of the Zealot, the way of the Essene. And I just was like, yes, that is so true. We don't want to have to deal with our fear, and we don't want to have to give up control.
Yep.
And that keeps us from going the Jesus way. And the reality is, this is why I think throughout history, the church has most of the time, when it's experienced revival and renewal, it's been among young people, not old people. Because the older you get, the more you get. You just accumulate stuff over your life. And then, and not even just stuff, kids. And kids are one of the biggest things that cause us to shift and start to live in fear. Like I've talked to so many parents through the years that are like, I just got to make sure my kids don't walk away from God, so we can't do anything, controversial or radical in the church. But don't you see that you're functioning from fear? And the same, and I'm not saying I'm innocent of it. Like, it was easy to be radical when Lorelei and I owned nothing and had nothing to lose.
Totally.
It's another thing to be radical when you got mortgage payments and you got responsibilities and you have kids and you're like, man, what happens if I go do that thing? What if it fails? Then there's going to be consequences. But if you don't, there's consequences. And that's, I guess, the thing that I see that's driving so much of this desire I see in a large part in the North American culture with the desire to hold Christendom together is it's all fear of what happens if we lose control. But at its core, we are called to be people who surrender control. We are called to take up our cross, die to self, and follow Jesus.
Nobody in the early church was like, hey, we should protest Rome to get them to legislate this, that, and the other thing, right?
Yes. Yes. Good luck with that.
Yeah, have fun. We'll kill you. Right?
And we're just so afraid.
Yep.
And we don't even want to acknowledge we're afraid. But then that fear just controls so much of our life. So
We didn't really get into any of the specific, but
No, but I think we talked
we
about it.
we could come back to it next week and start there. Seeing
Whoever
as
asks
we
the question, if they want to send in some AR, they can totally do that too. And
I'll push a little bit, just again intentionally to try to fish for questions. You mentioned the experience with your kid in the school. I think that's a whole nother conversation of cultural influences through public schools.
yeah,
versus cultural opinions on some of these things taking place in their own private places. What is the place of the public school? And right, that is an entirely different conversation.
I'd want to know your opinion on that. So please ask some questions. We would love to have them. Don't forget about episode 300, and we will talk to you guys next week.
Oh, wait. I just need to say, Blake, happy birthday.
Oh,
to
yeah.
all of the people
Happy birthday, Blake.
Who are listening. It is if you're live today, text Blake, inundate him with texts and phone calls, wishing him birthday greetings. And if you're watching this later, then just wish him belated birthday greetings.
There you go.
Maybe this is inviting some grief on my part, but quite a few years ago, when I first got on Facebook, I must have uploaded my birthday on there or something. So my first birthday comes around that I'm on Facebook, and I get like just tons of messages, and I'm like, how do these people know it's my birthday? I'm like, these people I don't even know. They're just like Facebook friends that are like, yes, I'll be your friend, And I was saying this out loud, and Erin, my wife, who knows more than me, she's like, well, it's obviously on your thing. So the next birthday, I go on and I actually told Erin, I said, I don't want all these dumb I want people to wish me happy birthday, people who know me, not just whatever. So I delete all that information off Facebook. Next day's my birthday. I just get slammed with messages coming from everybody. I'm like, what the heck? I deleted all that stuff. I found out later in the day that Erin sent out messages to everybody saying, please tell Blake happy birthday.
That's awesome.
So my wife loves me. It's good.
Yes, happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. Have a good week, everyone. See you later.
This has been the Living Springs Q&A podcast. If you have a question you would like answered or would like to learn more, visit us at livingspringsairdrie.com. Thanks for tuning in.